Hello, and welcome to the Sonic Fruit Film Podcast, where we aim to celebrate movies through the simple act of talking about our favourites. I'm Bennet Maples, and today I'm joined by the indefinable Adam Shepherd, who, in a recent poll, was unanimously voted Sonic Fruit's favourite purchasing manager, and the unrefundable Sam Hoad, media academic and Picture House employee. In this episode, we're talking about the Untouchables, which was not the examination we'd been seeking of those who failed to cry at the end of Armageddon, but is, in fact, a cracking movie.
So where do we begin talking about a De Palma film? I think probably any De Palma film, but this one particularly, I think, is interestingly a De Palma film.
It is. It's also interesting because it's not one that he originated. 80% probably of De Palma's stuff he writes. You know, he's a auteur, whatever you want to call it, but he would write and direct his movies. But this one was very much a job for hire. So,
because he's an interesting choice for director.
Very. I think when you look at this
good
package, it's really curious, but partly why it works so brilliantly. But so he was coming off a couple of quite high profile failures. The one, Body Double, was, you know, not just a bit of a commercial failure. He was kind of reviled by the critics and really taken to task for it. Then I think he did one called Tin Men, which was a comedy, like a fairly low scale comedy, but the kind of thing you might have expected somebody like maybe Barry Levinson to do, you know, like no, Tin Men is Barry Levinson, isn't it? He did one called Wise Guys, and I get them muddled because it's got a similar kind of feel, but it was a complete mismatch of director and material, and Wise Guys doesn't really work, you know. And so he was kind of not really having a very good time. He'd had a couple of flops and what have you, and he really wanted to make Casualties of War. Mm-hmm. But of course, every studio he was going to was saying, "No way, you're rubbish. You know, you've not had any hits, and we can't touch you." So he was kind of looking for something to do that would get some cachet in Hollywood again. You know, give him something but sort of bargaining position. And to their credit, the producers, when they looked at the script and the package and everything, somebody thought of him as being able to deliver what they wanted to be a lush, great-looking, gorgeous, you know, kind of cinematic reinvention of this TV show. And he did, in spades. But it was very much a job for hire.
Because it's got the De Palma
absolutely, that's what's
hallmarks, hasn't it?
Completely, yeah.
There's some very self-indulgent shots, but it's one of the few De Palma films where I don't just find myself watching it and thinking, oh, that's clever technically. I can really see how he's serving the story by doing things in one shot.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really interesting. There's not really any fat on this film at all. The whole film, it just drives forward, hurtles forward the whole time. And he serves that visually, and it also gives him the room to do the flourishes and the steady cams and the crane shots and all that stuff that he loves to do. And I'm sure at some point we'll discuss the Odessa Steps homage and all that kind of stuff. But all that stuff that's in every De Palma film he's ever done. But he's got that into this film to serve a huge commercial entertainment, tick all the boxes. Interestingly, that's kind of one of the things that I think you could also see potentially, or I did see potentially as a weakness when I first, because I rewatched this last week and I hadn't watched it for many, many, many years. I'm old enough to remember watching it when it came out, and then I got it on VHS, and then I got widescreen VHS with that innovation, and then DVD, and then Blu-ray, and every time I've kind of repurchased it, it's always one of the first things you kind of repurchase in the new format, but I'd never actually sat and watched it all the way through. You watch bits, because it's always on TV, but it's one of those films when you're flicking around and it pops up, you don't kind of think, oh, the Untouchables, and skip past it. It's one of those you kind of go, I'll just watch this bit, you know, which again I think is indicative of one of its strengths. It's endless sequences put together that are worth watching on their own. You know,
I find it stylistically really interesting because every time I watch it, I think it's 87. I think.
Yeah.
It feels like a 70s film to me, and somehow that's made it quite timeless. when I've revisited it, I've found every time I've expected it to feel really dated, and it does, but it feels really dated in the same way that I think it felt really dated actually when I first watched it. There's something slightly kitsch, slightly tongue-in-cheek about the style of it. There's De Niro's slightly hammy in it, but it works. It's beautifully done. I mean, the script obviously is very strong, and that holds those moments. The score,
brilliant.
We'll come back to the score in a minute, but it serves all the moments that it needs to serve, and it holds that style for me, such that actually I don't feel now that it's any more dated than it was when I first watched it.
That's really interesting. I'd agree with that. And I would say what my reaction to it, which I think was what I was rambling about earlier, was that initially, when I started rewatching it, I thought it was a bit weak, and that it felt corny and a bit.
Well, the introduction to Elliot Ness and his marriage is all very schmaltzy.
Yeah, she's in the kitchen making his lunch, and she goes out and hands it to him, and writing him a little love note. I mean, the women in the film, but there's barely any women in the film, and they are fairly poorly served. But and I thought, oh, well, this isn't how I remember it. This isn't as good as I remember. This is weird, And everyone in it was very two-dimensional. There was no real depth. There was no complexity or layers, And I thought, God, this is a bit naff. But then you get to the bit on the Canadian border. Mm-hmm. Where they go, and it basically turns into a Western. But I'll come to that in a minute. But you basically realise that in effect the whole film is kind of a Western. But and then I suddenly got it, and I suddenly realised what I was doing. And it's not trying to be The Godfather or Once Upon a Time in America or any of this. It isn't making some grand statement. It's a massive mainstream entertainment in a really, really populist genre. And he just directs the hell out of it. Visually, it's just gorgeous, and it's like it's hyper real. It's not meant to be realism.
Exactly. Yeah, I rewatched it and I thought, bloody hell, this is a bit ripe. That was the word.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, this is really comic book. And then I watched it as a kid and loved it. And I realised as a kid, because I could understand it, the baddies are really bad and the goodies are really good. And so it's that whole, like you say, mainstream populist entertainment, but delivered in such a, I can never say verve, bravura way kind of thing, And I think, it's initially a bit jarring. It's a bit off-putting. It's like, blimey, this is like some weird, and the score is very lush or very, it really is kind of knocking you over the head. But then once you click into it and go with it, it's just brilliant entertainment, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously we're going to talk about Morricone's score quite a lot, but each cue, there's loads of different types of cue, and they're
because you said the Canadian border bit, that cue, which I always think is very Elmer Bernstein,
when they go riding across, and it's like,
I hadn't appreciated that's in it before then. The bit that turns me, the bit where I really go, oh yeah, this is the film I love, is when they're walking over to the post office to kick the door in.
Yeah,
if you walk through this door, you're in for going into a world of trouble. That's the same cue. And it's such an uplifting piece of music.
They finish with it as Ness walks away, and
he's not playing the shot. It's quite a wide shot of the street. It's not very close to him at all. But yet the sense of momentum is fantastic, and as you say, it feels quite comic booky. It feels like it.
It's like like a fairy tale. They're dealing in kind of. What's the word? But the characters are just are types.
They're all tropes.
They're not. Yeah, they're not three-dimensional characters. They're not meant to be.
Yeah.
It's, as you said, it's black hats, white hats, goodies, baddies.
But at the same
and it's
time,
like a Western.
You've got all that simplicity going on, but you've got Mamet's script, which is brilliant, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Now this is interesting. I want to talk about that because yes, it's brilliant. But if you didn't know it was David Mamet, I don't think there's anything particularly Mamet.
Well, you wouldn't expect him to be writing something so kind of mainstream.
So it's it's a brilliantly constructed script. It's tight, and it hurtles forward through. But there's not really anything.
It's not
a literary
biographical
script.
I mean, it has been written to play on these elements that we're talking about. Capone apparently never called a hit on them. In fact, specifically had an order with his men that they weren't to be touched because he knew that the backlash of hurting a Treasury officer would be. Would be untenable.
So they were untouchable for that reason.
Yeah,
not
exactly.
They were. You can bribe them.
But that doesn't make for a good guys and bad guys. So actually, they've rewritten that in order for it to be much more, shootout with the good guys, and you don't know who's going to make it, and it heightens. But again, therefore, you wouldn't expect that to be a road that Mamet goes down. It feels quite populist. So it is a really interesting script from that point of view.
The number you talk about in Crossing the Street, I was struck by how many times you see them as their little gang, 4 or 5 of them, walking down a street with guns, which is where I come back to that sort of Western thing going on that they fully embrace by the time they get to the Canadian border, and it just turns into like a little Western bit. But the whole film is like that. That street outside their offices, it's almost like a one-street town. We are in Chicago, but you don't really see a lot else of Chicago. You just see that one street, and they walk up and down, and they run across it. And there's a brilliant scene where they threaten Elliot Ness's family, and he calls all the guys over to his house, and they all go over to his house, and then they sort out. They ship the wife and the child off out of the film for the rest of the movie, which is kind of serves that. But they ship her off, and then they all kind of walk down the street and then break into a jog, and that score again, that cue comes in, and the camera kind of comes up on the crane and goes away. But it's like that bit in The Wild Bunch where they all kind of walk in from the wings and join into a group and then walk off to their doom, something, And I suddenly realised that the whole film is laid out like a Western, and I suddenly, from a wobbly start where I was rewatching it thinking, this is going to be embarrassing, I'm going to go in there and I'm not going to like the film, I suddenly got it. So you can marvel in the technical mastery of it, because there is loads which we can talk about, but the construction of it, which again, to be fair, you do have to give to Mamet as well, is just sublime. It's brilliant the way they did that. And I think you've also been spoiled, I guess. So what is that, 87, so 30 years old now. The cinema scape is different now, and complexity and moral ambiguity and all that stuff is much more commonplace. And that kind of grand standing entertainment in that genre doesn't really happen anymore. If you make a gangster movie now, you can't make it simplistically.
No.
It would be just dismissed, So contextualising it in that way is important as well, I think. If you were to show that to somebody now who's grown up with Godfather, or Sopranos, where you've got layers and layers and layers, amazing stuff, they'd probably just dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah, Elliot Ness, as you say, seems quite two-dimensional at the beginning. That sense of he's got to cross the line, the what are you willing to do, but as you say, you couldn't do now. That everybody crosses the line. We're just waiting for him to do it. That he's got to do that, and
he's
like,
going to.
Pull your finger out and go and break some laws.
Do you think that's down to Costner or a clever bit of casting? Because I was watching it thinking he's brilliant for that role, isn't he? Because he's kind of a bit.
He's amazing casting. Because that's what this is like the beginning of a key decade for him, isn't it? He goes on.
This was what really broke him, isn't it? He'd had
anything. Really.
Silverado. He'd been in, and he'd
had a few roles.
Caught people's eye in Silverado.
Yeah.
But I think he did No Way Out and The Untouchables, and they were both 87.
Right.
So they both came out. And I think I'm right in saying Untouchables was the second or third highest grossing movie of the year. But you're right, he is... If you were being uncharitable, you could actually say he's quite wooden in it. He's basically a blank slate. And Connery is the showy kind of role, isn't he? He comes in and, from being this beat cop, he suddenly seems to know everything about Capone's empire and where to go and what to do and all the rest of it. But
I was reading up about it. He won the Oscar. I'd forgotten or didn't know that.
He won the Best Supporting Actor.
Despite also having his accent voted the worst accent in.
Does he even try one? I've rewatched it. I'm not even sure he's trying.
It's amazing. It's quite something, isn't it?
But I think.
But he is a great character in that, isn't
he? Yeah, and again, it's quite broad. All the performances are very. It's a broad.
Yeah,
film.
I was thinking, as you were saying that, I love Andy Garcia's character, but actually, it isn't that big. It isn't that big a role.
No,
it's really at the beginning. He comes in and he just will, pull the gun and he's a great shot, and then he doesn't really do anything until that final scene, where suddenly you just go, he's suddenly the coolest guy in the world. Why wasn't he the coolest guy in the world?
That's true.
Before?
Actually, he's kind of like
he stops the pram with one leg.
Yeah.
Whilst taking out the other guy and then lining up the other shot. I got it.
Yeah. And then there's a lovely bit in the office with Elliot where he gets given the...
Oh, yeah.
And he's just... it's like his eyes fill up with tears, but he doesn't let any of them go. And you're like, how do you do that? Yeah. But they're just there. He's the most reserved performance in a way in the whole film, isn't he? And so he's like the calm and...
But again, presumably,
I don't think he'd done.
He hadn't really done
much
very
anything
much.
really.
I mean, he's very young in it.
It made Costner. It probably made Andy Garcia. It gave Brian De Palma then the hit. So we then got Casualties of War, and set him off.
So what about the fourth guy, the unfortunate chap in the lift?
Charles Martin Smith.
What did he go on to do, or what had he done?
He's been around a while. He's
still acting in
Toad
movies.
in American Graffiti.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's in Starman. He's the government agent in Starman that is chasing down Jeff Bridges.
So don't worry about him.
He was good casting, I think,
Okay,
because
yeah.
he had to be the kind of bookish, anonymous one that no one really knew about. So cast someone that no one really knows about.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, we've just said they didn't really know about any of them except Connery and De Niro at that point. To be fair, I was struck watching the titles. I'd forgotten on the titles you get a separate credit that just says something like suits by or costumes by Giorgio Armani. And so that if anything should be the biggest clue as to what you're about to see. This film is just going. This film's going to look gorgeous, regardless of anything else. It's going to just look stunning, and it does. And I think
it cuts from those titles to this overhead shot of him in the chair, which is
brilliant, absolutely stunning because and he's hidden, isn't it? So it's like it starts with the reveal of the villain, doesn't it? So it slowly pans down, and no one's doing anything. They're all just standing there,
don't you? And then and he nicks him.
Yeah, but as the camera comes down, you've got all these people standing around in the room, but nobody's talking. There's nothing actually happening in the room while that text is there. So you're allowed to read the text, and De Niro's just still. Everyone's just standing still. It's like it feels really weird because you're like waiting for the play to start or something. They're all just standing there, and then as the camera pans down to him, and then it gets down onto his face, you then get the literal like reveal as the towel comes off, and then the dialogue starts, and then they start asking questions. And that's the cue to where you can speak now.
But it's lovely because it sets up not just the look and the feel of the film, but it sets up that sense of the way he's going to use the camera and things, which is so brilliantly.
And he does that stuff in his sleep. He just creates. It's a lovely cinemascope canvas. So you've got a glorious wide room, similar stuff like the opulence, like he did in slightly different, I guess, Endgame, but in Scarface you get an awful lot once he's starting to get his power and his money. You get these incredibly. There's an amazing shot in Scarface of Michelle Pfeiffer in this colossal bath, in this colossal bathroom, and she's just lost in this, gregarious like wealth show-off room, anyway. But that's a different film, so
he does something.
But he does that kind of stuff.
When there's a great long, one-shot tracking shot. He goes up the stairs to Capone's got like the top floor of this hotel, hasn't he? Yeah. But again, it's Morricone's music cue, which suggests this
fantastic brass fanfares.
There's a jazzy bit in there as well, isn't there?
And it's just opulent, and you just get the sense that it's everything comes together to tell you what it is. Very sort of directed filmmaking in terms of
you can't mistake any intent. You know exactly who everybody is, who you're supposed to root for. You to be honest, you know where the story's going, you know what's going to happen. It's about how you get there. And the Canadian border one is a great scene because you get told what's happening on that bridge purely through the images. There's no exposition. There's no, which again you wouldn't expect in a kind of a Mamet script. There's not a lot of, though they don't describe to you what's happening on that bridge. You just see something you don't see very much often anymore. Actually, you see like the binocular cutout.
That's another one of those moments where I just thought this is very 70s.
Yeah, you don't see that anymore, do you? It's really funny. But so you see the binocular cutout as they're following the truck on, and then the other truck on, and then two people talking, and he just tells you what's happening with no dialogue, and the image. But also, and this, since it's this podcast, we should also touch on this. Although he's renowned for and is brilliant as a visual director, he also really understands sound. The sound in it is used really interestingly for a mainstream movie.
I noticed rewatching it. There's some really clunky ADR, but I think that's because it's De Palma. There's so much camera use. Yeah. There's obviously an awful lot of times where they're just not going to be able to use the dialogue because you couldn't get a sound man in there because he's going to go from the wide shot right into the close up, or he's going to track with everybody, and there's probably 15 people walking with a dolly behind it, and
the worst, when the alderman comes to bribe Costner, there's a horrible bit when he's kicking the alderman out of the office, and all of that is just the looping on that has just been is awful. But
that, I think that also speaks to what you were saying, that he kind of has to understand sound, because I think there's an awful lot of if you're going to do shots like that, you're going to be in post reconstructing a lot of the sound, and you've then got the opportunity to think about how it's affecting you and whether you want everything back in there or whether there's additional things that you want that you wouldn't.
And he made Blowout. Have you seen Blowout?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
which
a
is
film
about that.
all about sound. So
Absolutely.
you've got like a visual text all about sound. You know what I mean? So he does get it. He
Well,
knows.
yeah. I mean, now you're saying it. The Odessa step scene, which we have to talk about, the sound in that is amazing. You know,
And
the
extraordinarily
whole great
brave.
long bit.
Yeah,
in a weirdly
you get to
bleak
the
and-
massive set piece, and you just basically drop all the sound, and then you pick out.
You just get
the
those
bits
little moments of
that
someone's
to
footsteps,
guide
a little
you
bit of a
where-
conversation. The door opens.
Squeak of
clunk
Yeah.
of the wheel, and when it then kicks, and it's like the bang, bang. It's like a relentless countdown as those.
Yeah.
And that's as you said, it's a mainstream commercial movie, and they just drop it. There's no like grandstanding score accompanying that or anything. It's just sparse. It's just bang.
Well, no, the score is extraordinary through that actually, because there's almost like a
like music box
thing.
Yeah.
Playing, and then the score through that. So it's the music box is almost played as if it's in the room,
That
and then there's these just really unsettling little moments of
that was
score that come
Morricone's
through.
idea. I remember that. I'm sure De Palma said something about he was they had like they came up with like 7-8 different ideas for that scene, how they were going to play that, and then Morricone said, "Let's do this." And I'm pretty sure actually, in
Well, it
saying
plays
that De Palma
it plays
was
the
like,
kid, doesn't it? And
I don't know
and
about
it
that.
keeps you focused on the
Yeah.
fact that whatever's happening, there's this mother with this kid in a
That's the
pram.
jeopardy, and of course Ness has just
And
had
I'd
a
never
child
thought
as
about
well.
it before. I mean, we've said it previously, but it's a different film being a father. I was watching the opening scene where that little girl runs out with a briefcase. I had to look away.
Can't believe it. That's
But it sets up this scene
yeah.
because you're then watching it and thinking that they're
Anybody's
not
fair game.
afraid to say, little, kids are going to get killed in this war as well. And here's a kid in a pram who's clearly in the midst of it.
And Ness has just had his own child, isn't he? So there's
Yeah.
all that. So you really feel him being torn between, I need to go and get that guy,
to
but
do this job, but I can't just let a mother
let that happen, And that's the kind of the ultimate saintly goodness. I remember at the time people were comparing Costner to Jimmy Stewart. You can imagine he's that kind of perfect character, isn't he, in Ness? And so he can't let that pram. He can't let that woman drag that pram up there. He's going to go and help, and then, as you say, when it's
Makes you wait for it, though, doesn't he? Because
it's fantastic, absolutely brilliant. It's superbly judged, though, because that could be really over the top.
Yeah.
He knows exactly when. You're right. He makes you wait, but he knows exactly when he's got to stop making you wait, and he has to deliver it.
We've just said there's so many extreme elements in that scene, but yet it just feels beautifully paced.
To navigate you through that, there's so much going on, but you never lose track of like where you are in the scene, where you are on the steps, where everybody is.
I always forget, like,
just
there's those
controls it.
soldiers or Navy guys
Yeah,
running down, and they
yeah.
get caught in the crossfire, and there's
Yeah.
loads of moving parts, isn't there? Like
Yeah.
you say, but
Well,
know
that's
exactly.
another Potemkin reference, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, the sailors on the steps, but that wasn't actually in the script.
Oh,
Did you
really?
know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, that was really. Apparently, David Mamet had written like a big action sequence for that scene. So when they go to get the accountant, he was going to be on the
he's
the
on the
train,
train.
and they were going to like follow him onto the train, and then they were going to like chase him through the train, and then the train was going to crash into another train, and there was going to be a big crash, and they were going to get the guy. But it was going to be the big kind of action set piece of the movie, which this has become the kind of centerpiece of the movie, although it's not a big action set piece as such. But the budget, there was nothing in the budget for that, and they were like, you can't do that. There's no way, whatever. So that scene was actually that. Perhaps why it kind of almost stands out almost so much in the film is that is pure De Palma, because he had to come up with something, and he said to them, well, give me some steps and give me a pram, I'll do it. And when he talks about it, he kind of says, I was basically doing it on the fly. Now we both know that in reality, when you've got that kind of crew and that kind of, it's not quite on the fly, but I do believe that it was as on the fly as a massive Hollywood production like that can be. It wasn't scripted. He'd created the setups and created the shots and was kind of piecing it together as he went, and then created it in the editing suite, which is where he's a master. But yeah, it wasn't even in the script. It was just, what can I do? Oh, I'll just, and he all right, you start off with a fairly good starting point. You think, I'll think of a film I can rip off. I'll do that incredibly famous sequence. But he really does put a lovely spin on it.
Again, that could have backfired
Lovely spin on it.
massively.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
If that's, if you're immediately going to, well, this is just a rip-off of, then it's got to be really, really good. And, he does just pull it off.
And I guess it's probably not too much of a stretch to say that by choosing to homage that film, it's maybe not going to be that familiar to a mainstream audience anyway. So again, a lot of the film critics obviously would pick up on that, and they did, and so on. But general moviegoer perhaps won't be that well versed in silent Russian cinema, so it would just be an incredibly well constructed, suspenseful sequence, wouldn't it? And it is.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. You're saying where he really kind of dominated was in the edit suite. I found that really interesting. There's a few shots where it's a single shot and it's following, and it's all beautifully constructed, and then it'll cut to the reverse, and then it'll cut back to the shot. It's like he's not afraid to go, I've done this whole shot and I've done it. Where a lot of directors, you just think, no, do you know what? We spent 3 days getting that shot right.
We'll take it right to the end.
We're not cutting out of it.
Yeah.
He knows to go, no, it's not complete unless we have that bit of information.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, though, one of my favourite shots in it, I'd never really noticed before, but there's a shot where Elliot Ness comes out of his office and everything's falling apart a bit towards the beginning, and Connery said that he's not interested in joining the team, and then he turns up.
He's sitting outside, right? Yeah.
And Connery sees it, Elliot Ness sees him and walks down the corridor towards him, and you don't see Sean Connery. You follow Elliot Ness all the way down the corridor. You see his reaction to the fact that Sean Connery's turned up, and he walks all the way up to him, and then we go behind Sean Connery's shoulder, and at that point Sean Connery turns around slightly and you see it's him, but you don't need to. It's all in Kevin Costner's reaction.
Yeah.
And it's just so brilliantly played that he understands that we know. Of course Sean Connery's going to join the team. Of course that moment is going to happen. This is that moment. We don't need to see Connery. We can just watch Kevin Costner's reaction to it. And it's just one shot following him all the way down the corridor backwards. And then he joins us and walks out. It's just amazing.
Yeah, which speaks again to what we were talking about, isn't it? Where it's just all, you know where it's going. You know what's going to happen. There's no surprises in this film, but it doesn't matter. Because it's just a rip-roaring, gorgeously shot.
And his understanding of the moment seems...
Yeah, I've been a big fan, and I am still a big fan of De Palma. He just understands the medium. We talked about the sound, but the visual stuff is just, it's peerless. He just knows exactly.
The scene where Capone caves the guy's head in with the
bat,
which is again a beautifully mastered scene.
Yeah.
But again, you don't see the caving. You see the aftermath. There is, there is a shot just in case you don't understand what's happened. Let's just establish that.
And there's a lovely flicker in Robert De Niro's eyes in that scene. He's easy to mimic, and that performance, perhaps that face, has been the one that has been mimicked ever since. And so you could look at it and think he's De Niro being De Niro, but I don't think in '87 he was being De Niro. I think he was just giving a performance. It's become hammy, but it wasn't, I don't think, particularly at the time. But there's a lovely bit when he's walking around and he kind of carries on his dialogue, but his eyes kind of flick, and there's just a fleeting expression across his face of just pure evil that goes on. That is just a brilliant, for whatever they say about him. I mean, that is a fantastic, subtle bit of acting.
And each time I
watch
that
in a broad
scene,
role, I mean, he is the pantomime villain, isn't he? He basically drops into the film. He's probably not. It'd be interesting to add up his screen time. Yeah. But 4 or 5 scenes, each one is very, very succinct, and is just he's really bad. He's a really bad guy. He's really evil. It's just bang, bang, bang. He is just the black hat villain, but he still manages to just give it a nuance, even when he hasn't got that much to work with, really. And that's fantastic, that little flicker on his face there. It just sends chills up your spine, even though you know what's about it.
And it really does, like I say, each time I watch that scene, I can never remember which of because it goes round the table, doesn't it?
Yeah.
At, I think, table level.
Yeah.
And you see them all sitting there in their big, like quite Mr. Creosote, some of them are big, fat guys, and I think it goes round past the guy and then goes back to him.
You think there's a couple of times you think you've got it, you think, oh, he's going to be the one, and you go, oh no, I think it's probably going to be him, and then they go back to that guy again,
brilliant.
And it's I mean now you'd have all sorts of horrible gory squishing, but it's just it's actually not a squish. It's like
it's played in sound. It's like a real clunk.
Talk about sound again. Yeah, it's like a.
But it's also it's played in reaction.
Yeah,
it's across there's shots across the table, and you're just seeing everybody, and everybody has been very kind of cool, and we're going to follow this man, we're going to follow anything he says, we're just going to hear and agree with, and then suddenly you're getting they're really wincing, and one of them goes, oh Jesus Christ, it's like
that's almost like a realisation of what they're actually involved with.
They can't not react to that moment, and as a result, you can't not react to that moment.
And Morricone does this whole Herman thing, and it gives this horrible discordant note as
on
it
that
pans.
Final wide,
And there's a little bit of splatter, isn't there? Like the alien dinner scene that you just get flump and just across the side of someone's face and everything. And that's all you need because you know what it takes to happen to someone's head for that to happen. And it's great, really good. And interestingly, that's actually quite restrained in a way for De Palma because his track record up to that point, as I say, the previous films, particularly Body Dubbing, is pretty full on. And I know he said as well that when Charles Martin Smith's character gets done in the lift, they were dressing that scene, for the shoot for that day and putting all the blood all over the walls and all over him and everything. And De Palma apparently came in and said, "Oh no, that's too much. You need to take that back. We can't." It was almost like he didn't want to, because you don't actually see him get shot either, do you?
No.
It's almost like that would be too much.
Yeah.
In this arena, in this film, in what we're trying to achieve. In one of his own, he might well have done it, but it was like, it's shocking enough that we've killed him. We don't want blood splattered there in every wall, and I don't need you to see him being shot. And in some ways, it's much more effective that you talk about reactions again. That's what he does in there, isn't it? You see Sean Connery walk into the lift, and you see Connery's reaction before you see Charles Martin Smith hanging up with his collar, and that's really upsetting. That's almost worse. That he's just been kind of hung on this hook in such a like a demeaning, just discarded way, when he was such a nice little chap, who'd never held a gun until he'd met Ness, and that's brilliantly done, that scene, for being less showy again, which isn't what you would normally associate with De Palma, but he knows when to and when not to. Yeah, he really does. I was going
to say that scene in contrast to Connery's death, which is very showy, and I think brilliant. I mean, I remember from the first time I saw the film, remembering that POV shot of the guy climbing in the window and going through the house.
That's
and
typical
he's
De
not
Palma,
where,
isn't it?
He's not where you think he's going to be, and he's behind you, but he doesn't seem to have noticed. And it's like, he's creeping up on him, and then he pulls a gun. He knew he was there the whole time, and everything's going to be okay. And
he walks out the door.
But all in one shot, but done to serve the moment.
Yeah.
But contrastingly, then you do see gore. I mean, he gets shot to bits, but it's Sean Connery. So you're not going to believe he's dead unless you really see.
I think it's one of the great death scenes. That bit where they come into the flat and they find him on the floor and he's reaching, and you think he's reaching for his, religious, and he's reaching to tell him, and then his dying breath is that whole, "What are you prepared to do?" kind of thing, and brilliant.
Connery, and Costner does well in that as well. The reaction there, you feel his loss in that moment to be,
Yeah, I mean, he's as you say, Sean Connery's character is so much the big character. Yeah, to remove that from the dynamic seems like such an unlikely thing. You really don't feel like that's going to happen. I mean, in the cliched kind of, as you say, the good guys and the bad guys, that good guy's not going to die. I mean, Andy Garcia's character, maybe you'd think would be disposable in a gunfire.
Well, it's kind of, this is off the top of my head, so bear with me, but it's kind of like Obi-Wan going, isn't it? Because he's the voice of wisdom to the young apprentice, and then he's gone, and then and then Elliot Ness has to then pick it up and just run with it. With all you needed really was a little voiceover from Sean Connery, and that would all work together. But that's quite a classic structure in itself as well. I agree with what you're saying, but it is also quite classic, isn't it? The old wise one imparts his wisdom, kind of creates Elliot Ness, gives him the tools he needs, and then leaves the scene, and then Ness then takes that on, and then you get that great showdown in the court and all the rest of it. And
what about the ending, the whole thing on the roof and the pushing him off and everything? How do you respond to it? Because I always forget that there's an extra bit after the Odessa steps.
Yeah, I'm the same actually. When it cut to the court, I did think this time. Oh yeah, it's got this.
Oh yeah, I've forgotten about. Yeah, that is such an iconic scene. That Odessa steps. You think it's the finale, and it's not even the finale.
Yeah.
Because that bit where they pull him out of the court because he's spotted he's got a gun, and then he lights the match, or
and all of that. Nowadays you almost get they'd probably do a little insert flashback to just make sure you knew where Racine Street was. Yeah. But he just trusts that you will remember that. Yeah. Because when he shot it the first time,
well, it's also again scripting.
He makes such a big deal of it.
Because Costner says, Costner's trying to kind of bring it out of him, and
I had a friend who used to live there. That's true. I'd forgotten that line. Yeah, he does say that.
So he does it in dialogue, which is great.
And when he comes out of the court, De Palma suddenly drops the camera really low,
Right
doesn't he?
down.
And shoots right up high, and you see that incredible ceiling, which is like a
vaulted kind of.
yeah, or like a religious, like a church window or something on the ceiling. And it stays down really low as they're moving out, and you just know something's going to happen. Like the world's kind of gone off its axis at that point, and you're waiting for it to what's gone wrong, what's happening, and then it's just teased out. You realise who he is. Costner suddenly realises who he is. Is he going to run away? Then he pulls the gun out, and that whole scene then goes on for ages.
Up the stairs. There's like a couple who are like shot as he's running up the stairs. They fall, and then that bit on where he pushes them off. And
it is actually quite shocking. Not in a gore kind of a way, but that's quite a shocking thing to do for Ness at that point. He throws the guy off a roof.
Yeah.
That's like really quite unpleasant and brutal thing to do, and he's been pushed to that point. And that is, you talked about the girl at the beginning, and I agree, like even 30 years later now, and I knew that scene was coming, that's a very shocking scene.
It's
it kills
played off,
a young girl,
though, isn't it? There's the moment where he's climbing down the rope and has the gun trained on him, and then releases, and very, 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 in close-up, releases the trigger of the gun. He isn't going to shoot him, and you see the guy react and think, "Oh, I've got away with this. I'm off."
And then
this guy's not going to shoot me.
Squealed,
stuck Irish pig.
And did he sound something like that? But
because that's the
a very
contrast.
brutal.
It's like he's the man who won't do that.
Yeah.
And then he knows that actually the only way that he's going to get this guy is.
Yeah, because he's got the mayor.
He's got everybody, hasn't he? That's
the
thing. And it's a hands-on. He doesn't shoot him from 6 feet away. He takes him by the lapels and he actually throws him off the roof.
Yeah.
That's bloody, literally bloodied hands. He's right in there. And again, we've talked about the construction and how simplistic it is in that sense. That you don't question that behaviour in any way.
No.
That's absolutely supposed to happen. Whereas now, I think you get much more of a conflicted, hero or anti-hero in that moment, whereas this is like, no, he absolutely deserves to be thrown off that thing, and there's no regret or guilt or anything in that. That's just bang, straightforward.
What a face that guy's got! It's just horrible.
He is evil, isn't he? Yeah, he's always evil in everything he's in, isn't he?
And they dress him, and then they dress him in a white suit. So and I remember that because he's kind of, so he doesn't really do.
It's not a great
very
fitting
much.
suit, though, is it? Yeah, that's the thing. You know he's evil because his suit doesn't fit very well.
But you always spot him. He's always visible in the background of scenes, and so he floats about as just this kind of evil presence. But because he didn't actually have to, he doesn't do or say really anything throughout the film, but he's just always there, and you always see him, so he's like Capone's kind of agent running around doing his dirty work, and that's a really simple idea. I mean, he's a baddie in a white hat, but to dress him in that whole white suit, I'm sure that's about you spot him. He's like a little angel of death for Capone.
Among all the henchmen.
Yeah, it's again, but so, and it's just also beautifully stylized, which could be a weakness, like we said, but I don't think it is.
No.
Once you suddenly, it just took me a little while, having not seen it for 20 years, to key back in. But once you get where he's coming from, it's sublime.
So much to enjoy.
Yeah.
And a great closing line where she says, "Prohibition's going to be recalled. What are you going to do?" And does he just have
a drink? And it cranes up, and you're back in that.
But delivered in a really cheesy way. But I was thinking the music. I mean, again, that cue kicks in, so it just supports it so brilliantly. Because I had a moment when I heard that line of, "Oh, that's how it ends." But then the music comes in, and I was like,
it's like, because it's like that though. There's a I always think of it in many films. You have like what I think of it as like the drunk on the bench sort of moment. So something crazy will happen, and then you'll cut to a drunk on the bench. You'll kind of look at his drink and go, "Whoa," and like toss it away, like, "Oh, I'm never doing that again." And it's sort of that jokey moment, and it's in loads of films. It's even in Back to the Future when the car disappears. He kind of looks at his drink as well, and it's supposed to be funny, but you've seen it like 1,000 times. You're like, "Oh, that's so cheesy." And he even manages, like on the bridge in the Canadian Mountie sequence, Charles Martin Smith kills or disarms one of these guys, and the truck with all the whiskey in it has been riddled with bullets, and the drinks come out, and he even has like a kind of a shifty look around and like splashes the whiskey into his mouth, and it's a bit kind of shticky, it's a bit jokey, but you just kind of let it go because the whole film is, I'm not suggesting the film's shtick, it's way more way more clever than that and sophisticated than that. But that kind of broadness, it's quite a broad joke, really. It doesn't jar you out. It kind of fits, and you don't resent it. You don't think, oh, that's cheap.
Also, he's been quite
like that last line. You don't.
He's been quite two-dimensional up to that point, hasn't he? And the fact that he's then, he's seen Andy Garcia get shot on the shoulder, and just, that just tips him over the edge, and he's got a gun, so he just shoots everybody inside. Yeah. It's his moment, isn't it? That film, really?
Absolutely.
So you kind of need a closure for that, because we're then going into the.
So, like the last line, which could be and can be considered cheesy, it's kind of like in that fairy tale-y comic book world that you described earlier, is that it just fits. It doesn't jar. It doesn't bother you like it would in something else. Brilliant.
On which note, I'd like to thank Sam and Adam for joining me, and I'd like to thank you for listening. Don't forget you can email us at podcast@sonicfruit.co.uk, or you can tweet at us via @sonic_fruit. The Sonic Fruit Film Podcast is produced by Sonic Fruit, with music by Carl Cole and engineering by Jake Kenny and Jordan Brett. For more information, check out sonicfruit.co.uk.